Thank you, Tony. You are all welcome. On behalf of the U.S. National Committee of Association of Polar Area Career Scientists, we welcome you all to this webinar. We look forward to having a fruitful time with you all. So today we are considering the updating the researchers toolkit, policy engagement for a changing landscape. Tony has gone through some housekeeping, but for this meeting, this is briefly what to expect. In the next 5 minutes, we'll go through some introduction, talk about what to expect in this workshop or the things we had in mind while organizing it. And then we'll introduce our panelists. And afterwards, for about 20 to 30 minutes, the panelists will share with us their perspectives and ideas concerning the topic at hand. Just like Tony mentioned, we'll have a Q&A. We'll start with some of the questions you sent in already. Then afterwards, we'll go through the remaining questions. Feel free to use the Q&A button to add your questions and upvote the other ones you would like to for us to consider. At any point during the session, you are free to ask questions, make suggestions, and seek clarifications. After the Q&A session for about 20 minutes, we'll spend the next 30 minutes in breakout rooms. As Tony mentioned, those are not recorded. The idea is that you have time to make meaningful connections and ask very important questions dear to you. Afterwards, we'll come back for a recap and some closing remarks and acknowledgement. The end of this seminar, webinar, we anticipate will be the beginning of fruitful engagement afterwards. So with that in mind, I will share with you what we had in mind while organizing this webinar. As you may be aware that changing the evolving public policy landscape in the US has placed strain on science research funding in many ways. And based on feedback from our members and the other scientists that are affiliated with us, especially the early career scientists, we feel that at some point there's need to review the entire researchers toolkit. As researchers, we are, well adept talking to ourselves in very technical terms, but not so much with those other stakeholders like the policy makers and decision makers and even community leaders. These are things we'll begin to address in this webinar. So we'll look at how to identify the funding risk, how the funds that are meant for sciences could be jeopardized as a result of changing policy landscape. Then we'll now consider ways for to ensure and advocate for sustainable investment in all tiers of science, from basic science to more practical ones. To do those effectively, we will need to hone the skills of talking to a diverse, non-technical audience that include community leaders, policymakers, and decision makers, so that everyone will be on our side while we advocate for sustained funding in sciences. Then ultimately, the aim of all this is to build sustainable, long-term partnerships that we can always fall back irrespective of the evolving policy landscape. Luckily, we have some members, some other scientists that have gone well ahead. They recognize the need for this, and for the past 2 decades or so, have been, working in this area. But their work, I won't say we are not so recognized, but the evolving situation now makes their work more imperative. So I would say we are honored and thrilled to have three eminent thought leaders in science policy, science diplomacy, advocacy, and communication join us today for this webinar. In no particular order, um, it's Liz Landau. Liz is the Director of Science Policy and Government Relations at the American Geophysical Union. I think the American Geophysical Union, and Liz will collaborate that very soon, is the largest Earth and space organization in the world. These are people studying Earth processes, biological, physical, and social, from the deepest trenches in the ocean to the highest peak in the mountains, from the hottest deserts to the coldest region in the poles. And Liz has the duty of kind of collating all this research and the relevance of this research and making a strong case for their funding and their support before policymakers. And he has done that for the past 18 years and has started other programs that she will tell us more about. I'm careful, to resist the temptation to reel out all the, spectacular resume and CV. And I'm careful not to let the cat out of the box. But I suspect there is a cat somewhere, but you will find out soon. I don't want to say more than that. The next is Alan Pope. Alan Pope presently is the Secretary General of the International Glaciological Society. And I may mention that Alan is the fourth occupant of this position since the founding of the International Geophysical Society in 1936. Before that, Alan was at NSF, where he served as program manager for the Polar program and international science and engineering programs. And in the past was the Secretary General of the International Arctic Science Committee. In this role, he engaged extensively with policymakers, business leaders, international science fund agencies, while managing the Polar Cyber Infrastructure Program and science diplomacy with other stakeholders in North America. Next is Twyla Moon. Twyla Moon, I would say, wears multiple hats at the same time. He's the deputy lead scientist at the Center for Research in Environmental Sciences and the deputy lead scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center at UC Boulder. He has testified for the U.S. Congress in the past and has leveraged all this role to disseminate information among researchers and policymakers, business leaders, and philanthropists. As I said before, I want to restrain myself from, reading out all the wonderful things on the CV and letting the cat out of the box. There is a cat, I suspect. We'll find out soon. So we are delighted to invite the panelists to, make some opening remarks and tell us, share with us their perspective. May I start with no particular order? Let's start with Liz.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Izu. Thank you to the whole team for hosting us today. Much appreciated. And thank you everyone for joining as well. I've had a little bit of an internet issue earlier, so hopefully that won't come up again. But if it does, I'll be right back as soon as I can. So as Izu said, I'm Liz Landau. I'm the Director of Science Policy and Government Relations at AGU, and I've been with the organization for 18 years at this point. So we were asked to provide you all a little background to start out, spend about 5 minutes talking about our background and what we worked on. And hopefully that will be helpful to you to get a sense of the types of things that we can discuss today, or even get an idea of, what our career paths have been like and what might be interesting to other folks on the call here. So, as I said, I've been working in science policy for almost 20 years. I have my bachelor's and my master's in geological sciences, and my master's thesis topic was in paleoclimatology and paleooceanography. During my master's, I got really interested in science policy and I started to explore what that might look like. It was something that previously I didn't really know existed or was a field. And so it was something that I felt was a compelling way to be able to use the value and wonder of science in a different way that wasn't academia. And so I wound up applying for and getting an internship with the American Geosciences Institute in science policy. And I will say to anyone that I think internships are a fantastic way to get experience in science policy if anyone is looking for that next step or just wanting to see if it's a good fit for them professionally. So working in that world really opened doors for me. And I started working in science policy in 2007. And I've seen 4 different administrations and lots of leaders and swings of Congress. So there's been a lot that has happened that I have been able to experience in this world. It's really been a variety of work that I've done throughout that time, but I'll touch on a few examples that showcase the type of work that I've done, the variety of topics, and also the challenges and value of that work. I will say day to day in science policy, there's a lot of information processing, figuring out what's new, what's happened. There's a lot of prioritization, figuring out what's critical and what we need to respond to. Frequent shifting. Sorry, I see my videos lagging a little. Let me know if I lag too much. And we're always working on multiple fronts at once. Working for a society and for AGU in particular, we're really thinking about what are our priorities and goals for our membership and what will truly be helpful to our members. So that's something that we're always focused on when we're thinking about what are our priorities, what are our goals, and what parts of science policy are we going to work on. It also includes a lot of collaboration and meetings, working with other partners, organizations, and ensuring that we are working with the other groups and know what everyone else is prioritizing as well. In terms of big picture, some of the types of things that I've worked on, the variety and scale of things that I've done. So working along with scientists, with committees, identifying priorities, creating documentation that can be used in science policy, finding out what those critical issues are for the scientists at any given moment, and ensuring that we are then, on the flip side, working directly with policymakers and their staff, building those relationships, ensuring that we can work with them and that they are well versed in the sciences that are critical to us and to our scientists. And what I have done with a lot of my time is building programs and events to help support scientists. So that includes things like we've had a science policy conference specifically focused around science policy topics. We had that for 3 years in Washington, D.C. In addition, we've had programs like Geopolicy Connect, where we have brought together a group of folks in a geographic region. We did one in Pennsylvania, we did one in Colorado, and we brought people from policymaker backgrounds, science backgrounds, other key stakeholders, and had conversations about critical geoscience policy topics. I helped launch the AGU Voices for Science program, which is a year-long volunteer training program that helps scientists become advocates for science and gives them policy and communications training. The AGU Days of Action, where we create activities throughout the year that help scientists find ways to activate either locally or in Washington, D.C. to help make a difference in science policy. I've helped to grow our online advocacy opportunities so people can easily write or call their members of Congress. We've done a lot of global expansion of work throughout the time that I've been at AGU, so ensuring that all of our global membership have ways to engage in policy no matter what country they're in. And a ton of training programs, things at meetings, conferences, workshops, really built into all of our programs. In addition, I help with things like AG's Congressional Science Fellowship Program, where we bring a scientist to work for Congress for a year. AG's position statements, which are really the foundation of a lot of our policy work and are part of how we work with Congress, ensure that Congress knows the critical aspects of science and other policymakers as well. Um, Things have really changed over time. It's certainly been interesting to be in this field over time and see how things have shifted. Some of the challenges are those moving targets and the multiple foci that you have, making sure that you're jumping from one thing to the next to be responsive as policy issues move through the system, and also ensuring that you're pushing out that critical science and science learning. So I will say impacts of my work. The slide here shows just some things from last year to showcase some of the value of what we're able to do, although obviously it's been many years of this type of work. I think some of the most valuable impacts of my work truly are working with people, our scientists, our staff, watching them grow and helping them get more versed in science policy and advocacy. A lot of our folks start out saying, hey, I want to make a difference or help in science policy, and I don't know how. And we wind up being able to give them a lot of help and opportunities, trainings, and resources so that they are able to become change makers in policy in a way that they had hoped to be. So it really creates sort of an exponential impact through helping others advocate. And I would say what I enjoy most about my job is working with those motivated scientists, helping others to achieve their goals, seeing good policy changes happen that we know we helped with, and watching it click for scientists that they can really make a difference. Okay. And with that, I think I'll wrap up and hand off to the next panelist. Thanks so much, Izzy.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. The next is Alan Paul.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the introduction, Izu, and thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Yeah, I'll give a quick intro to who I am and I guess how I got here. My name's Alan. As said before, I'm the Secretary General for the International Glaciological Society, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but it means that these days I help connect glaciologists with each other around the world. And so before I get to the IGS side of things, maybe paint a little bit of a picture of how I got to where I am. My background is as a research glaciologist. Did my PhD in remote sensing of glaciers and then a postdoc, started as a research scientist and was all set to go down that research scientist sort of role, mostly based mostly using remote sensing, but doing a lot of field work. It was field work that kind of got me into glaciology. You'll hear more from Twyla later, but at one point I was working at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, and we were colleagues there. Um, when I started looking into what my next steps were going to be, I was applying to faculty jobs and things like that. Um, and then I also saw this other role for the executive secretary for the International Arctic Science Committee, or IASC. This job happened to be in Northern Iceland. It sounded really interesting, but it wasn't research anymore. It was about the people side of science. And it really intrigued me. It was kind of a different path than I had thought about. But when I thought about what I really enjoyed in doing a lot of my research, it was a lot of the people aspects of science. I had actually gotten really involved in the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, also involved with AGU, did a congressional visit day as well. Thank you, Liz. And gotten involved in different committees and things like that. And So when I saw this IASC role, I was like, oh, the people side of research and connecting research with researchers with each other and with people who can use it. And that seemed really intriguing to me. So that's why I took this job with the International Arctic Science Committee, moved to Northern Iceland for 4 years. One of the well, that job had a lot of different aspects. Sometimes being a representative for Arctic scientists, sometimes connecting policymakers or decision makers with Arctic scientists, or suggesting possible people within the Arctic science community to be like, oh, this person could help with those questions or could serve on this committee or help write that report. We also hosted conferences, had fellowships and awards and things like that. Um, like I said, I did that job for a few years for personal reasons. I was hoping to come back to the United States, where I'm based now, and saw a job as a program officer at the National Science Foundation, and so applied to that. Full disclosure, I applied for one job, didn't get it. The day I did the interview, I was like, oh, these people would be really great to work with, and applied for a different job, and I ended up getting that one. So I ran the Polar Cyber Infrastructure Program at NSF for a couple of years, was in the Polar Programs Office, or Office of Polar Programs, sorry. That was a term position, and then switched into the Office of International Science and Engineering, where I ran a program called ExcelNet, and also handled NSF science diplomacy with partners in Canada and Mexico, primarily a little bit all over the place. But there, again, it was the people aspect that really was exciting, right? It was a lot of admin, but it was a lot of people sending me good ideas and working with them to figure out how to make that awesome science happen, whether it was at the level of a particular researcher, at the level of a team, or thinking about how to get, say, US researchers working broadly with Canadian researchers, or things like that. Um, yeah, and so after a few years there, I started this role with the International Glaciological Society just this past October. Really excited to get to work with IGS, to come back to my kind of my roots in glaciology. And so now at IGS, we are a professional society for all those studying all aspects of the cryosphere. So yes, glaciers, which is in our name, but when the society was named in 1936, glaciology kind of meant more cryosphere. So sea ice, snow, permafrost, all of that sort of stuff as well. And so we publish a couple journals. We have a few symposia every year. We have awards, small grants, global seminar series, all of this sort of stuff. And so, like I said before, my goal is to help connect glaciologists with each other, to advance their science. And so I often think about that the job title is Secretary General, but I sometimes term myself as a science community manager, because it's the people aspect that I like to focus on. And when we're thinking about science policy and like what that means to different sorts of people, I adapted this Venn diagram, with some of you might be familiar with, from Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's climate action Venn diagram. And so thinking about what role you might have with your work, what's really sustainable is at this intersection of what you're good at, what work needs doing, and what brings you either joy, satisfaction, career advancement, basically what's going to enable you to do that work and keep at it in a long time. So that's sustainable and impactful. If you are in the middle of this Venn diagram, are you having successful action? You might find yourself at the intersection of two out of the three. And so thinking about how to take yourself from that intersection of two things to the third. For example, where the arrow is pointing, right? Are you good at something and you enjoy it, but does it need doing? Maybe think about what needs to be done. Liz talked about pivoting and saying, like, what's the priority right now? Or you could say, like, this is really important and I think it would be really beneficial, but am I the right person to do that? If you're in that corner, well, maybe you find a partner to work on that together, that sort of thing. And so that's one of the things I think about in my job right now is, am I the right person to do this? Or is it more about working with partners in the broader glaciological community to make something happen? So thanks so much for letting me introduce myself, and I look forward to the later Q&A sessions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Now let's invite Twyma.
Hi, thanks so much also to the organizers for bringing together a panel where we represent a range of sort of workspaces that connect to science and policy, not always just science policy. Even reading people's kind of what comes to their mind in science policy, you could see it's thinking about policies and rules specifically about how science is done or funded, other interpretations in regards to how science might inform policies on other kind of topics. It can look like helping to create policies, helping to just educate people who are making policy decisions so that it might include new information, elements of communication or kind of more direct writing and getting into the weeds of different policies moving forward. So there's a lot of flavors. And another thing is that there's also a lot of levels to do this. There's international spaces, federal or national spaces, also state, local, town. So I really encourage people to think widely in applying that super helpful Venn diagram that Alan put up for us in thinking about the area that you're going to work, because it's perfectly fine if you think that talking to people on a national level is not sound like that fun to you, and you want to really get your hands dirty with people who live in your local community, for example. So I'll just speak to this one slide that I put together as a bit of an intro of who I am and where I got to this point. So I did my undergraduate work at Stanford, where I really just fell in love with ice. Thanks to that education space for allowing that to happen. It was not until I got to the University of Washington in Seattle for graduate school that I started really understanding more in especially science communication. So I didn't start with thinking science and policy specifically. I've really come into this as with an interest in science communication. And there I was able to take classes in like science journalism, work with the program on climate change, which was itself an interdisciplinary program, and starting to bring together people thinking about climate from different topical areas, both inside and outside of physical sciences, as well as across those physical sciences. That was really helpful for me starting to learn the foreign languages of these different areas. And that's something that I want to emphasize. AGU has some amazing resources in regards to getting to know some of the policy space and understanding the languages that they use, the time scales that get used, how policy is created and moved forward. So learning these foreign languages is a big help to you if you'd like to interact with professionals in these spaces, or consider becoming a policymaker yourself. I actually just saw, I'll drop the link later. I just saw a post about a webinar coming up here in a week or so about scientists moving policy, and part of it is scientists being policymakers. So then I did some postdoctoral work at CU Boulder, University of Oregon. This is where I was getting involved with the study of environmental Arctic change program search. They had a land ice action team, which was interested in the communication of science knowledge out to communities making decisions. They were really interested in, for example, creating science briefs, these 1 or 2 page summaries of science written in ways that's going to be understandable by policymakers, and then getting those 2 pagers out to people, in this case, with a focus on the US Congress. So it was really helpful experience to start learning about that. I recommend thinking about creating those kinds of short communication pieces for your science, regardless of whether it's policymakers or others who you want to understand what you're doing. I took a faculty job at the University of Bristol in the UK. This was really useful for understanding what policy and academic systems can look like in other countries, and understanding what is unique and different about the US, what is unique and different about the UK, also understanding a bit more about other European systems. So that was a really helpful perspective, and also continuing to take advantage of meeting other people who are working in climate communication, in, what does it look like for climate science to make it beyond the box that we are in. And then I put a square back at CU Boulder. I've been back at the University of Colorado Boulder since 2017, with a couple different affiliations within series. NOAA Cooperative Institute that the university has, both at the National Snow and Ice Data Center and more recently their Center for Education, Engagement, and Evaluation, where I've just launched a program called Engage Climate Science, whose entire purpose is to try to get some climate science fundamentals, tools, solutions, and decision frameworks to professionals outside of science and academia. Now, the reason I want to tell you about that program is because it was a long slog to get the university to say yes to creating a position that combined scientific research and science communication and engagement work. But I am certain that even some of you on this call have the skills and are developing the skills to be world-class scientists and world-class communicators or engagement folks. And I want these positions to exist for you. So feel free to take a look at the example that I'm working to create. Heidi Roop is a person who's created this in a university with like an extension model. Other things like this. I want these positions to exist for you, and I encourage you to develop the skills so that hopefully you can take them on. I do work remotely, which has made the way I engage with people look different than if I was on a campus. Both of my cats, Onyx and Sage, are also here in the office doing their important science thinking as we meet now. I really became interested in also learning and communicating about local to global impacts. I think a lot of being successful in science communication and science policy work is systems thinking, connecting dots. Many policymakers, particularly if you're going to them, not necessarily to influence a policy about doing science or about science funding, but to influence a policy that they might newly create or that they're thinking about. Policymakers have a lot on their plate, and the more that you can bring to them a systems connection so that the thing that you're sharing about might be connected to economics or health or infrastructure or jobs creation, all of these other topics can be really helpful because a policymaker is generally going to be a lot more enthusiastic about an idea that can hit several nails rather than just focus on one, because they've got a lot on their plate, and science is usually not the biggest thing on their plate. I hate to break it to us. And I think another area to be really mindful, particularly here in the US, is the challenge of science communication and politics. I think probably all of us are at least a little bit brokenhearted that climate science is such a political issue, particularly in the US, but also in different flavors globally. And being really mindful about what it means to bring forward scientific information to inform decisions versus perhaps choosing policy advocacy, which might be a thing you want to do. For example, with the Office of Management and Budget rule and regulation changes that are open for public comment now through the 13th of July. Every single person in this group can comment on that. You need not be a US citizen. Those kinds of things, you might take an advocacy hat, and you need to be mindful about how that work is maybe happening outside of your university or outside of your university's resources, and what are places where you're sharing information for good decision making that can more often happen within a university context. So there are important nuances as you think about sort of what you are going to be sharing, who you're going to be sharing it with, and how much positionality you might have depending on the space that you're taking action. So those are just kind of a few comments and a little bit getting to know my pathway along related to science and policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Twyma. Thank you, Amen and Mies. I mentioned that I suspected that there is a cat, and I'm happy I'm not the one that let the cat out of the bag, out of the box eventually. But I think there are two. I was expecting only one, but two of them are with us right here. That said, I think I've seen some of the questions coming up, and some are quite interesting. I think this time we'll have some time to go through a few of those questions. So take our time if anything comes to mind to put it in the Q&A section, and you probably review the others there and upvote accordingly. Quite a few questions here for us to get started, and I think this is a good time for me to stop sharing so that we'll be focused on the questions and the responses. So, we have kind of an international audience, and someone is wondering how practical all these ideas could benefit someone that is not in the US. Any of the panelists can, swing at it, and others can chime in. Feel free. Someone is asking, how would this benefit someone out that lives outside the US?
I'm happy to kick us off and then pass it on to the next person. Thank you for this question. I think it's really important. I think it can be easy for folks who are based in a certain country, particularly the US, where we're often, rather insular, to really be thinking about the US first. And I think it's critical to show that people from anywhere in the world can be part of science policy in this conversation. And I'm sure Twyla and Alan will have additional comments to add. I would say personally, any conversation that you have about working with policymakers or translating science or making science accessible for other audiences is something that generally has a lot of really transferable aspects to it. While governments may vary highly from one country to the next, a lot of the skills of working with policymakers or critical stakeholders are very similar. It's about meeting people where they are, it's about understanding what their values are, and about making sure that the information that you're sharing is shared in a way that is accessible and is shows the value related to things that they care about, essentially. And I will say, for folks who may be in the US for some period of time but aren't necessarily US citizens, you can still engage in science policy in the US. And we certainly work with a lot of scientists who are here for just their school or for a postdoc or some other short term position. And you're absolutely welcome to be engaged in the process here. And I hope that people will also feel that they are welcome if they are spending time in other countries as well to engage there. I'll leave it at that. I'm sure Twyla and Alan have more to add.
Thanks for that, Liz. I feel like I should probably jump in since international is the first letter in or the first part of IGS. Yeah, I think that what Liz said is completely accurate, right? You're leveraging a lot of the similar approaches and tools. I also think that depending on where you are in the world, you might be differently, say, placed to address particular challenges. And so if you are either approaching that from the, hey, what's my positionality and therefore what change can I affect, start from there. Or you could say, hey, this is really what I want to do. What international partners might I need to work with, or where might I need to go to achieve those particular aims? There's not any one particular answer, but I think that working with colleagues internationally can really help bring additional perspectives and additional points of view to how you approach your work. I would also say that so much of our science is connected science. So much of our advocacy is connected advocacy. And so that might mean learning lessons from international colleagues. That might mean sharing lessons to international colleagues. But by talking about what we're doing and what we want to do with our colleagues, you can definitely achieve a lot more because they might have solved a problem already, or you might be able to work together to solve it.
Just to briefly add about kind of, benefits internationally, I do think it's an area too where staying abreast of what is happening in science policy in different countries can be really helpful for as a community helping each other out. Being aware of, what agreements, for example, the National Science Foundation has an MOU with NERC funding agency space in the UK. You might combine work in order to receive funding from both. You might pay attention to countries that support using that funding to support people who are citizens of their country, as well as collaborators in other countries. Some nations and or funding agencies do this, others do not. It's really helpful not only to kind of know that about others, someone may have funds and be able to collaborate in a different way, but also how you might be able to give back at different points of time as different policies change in different places. And also thinking about those kinds of bodies that push on scientific collaboration. Alan, of course, also mentioned IASC, the kind of Arctic focused international science committee space. There's, of course, SCAR, focused on Antarctica. And those are other places where international awareness is really baked into it. And there's a lot of space for collaboration. And of course, as we're coming up here to the International Polar Year, thinking about whether there are maybe policies or policy makers that you might want to push on or bring into the fold to really encourage international work on IPY.
Thank you. The next set of questions, or before I get to that, it's a lot of people with little or no experience in public policy seeking connections. And if you don't mind, the panelists, they would like to connect with you, maybe through your social media handle. So if you have your LinkedIn handle ready, could you please share with them on the Zoom chat? And they will be happy to connect with you over LinkedIn. Feel free to add your LinkedIn handles. And if you are here, it means you are, without admitting it, an enthusiast of science policy. And others may probably want to connect with you. Feel free as well to add your LinkedIn handle if you have one, or other social media handles, so that people will begin to connect with you and engage even after this webinar. The next question is, I will try to condense it because it's like more of a people with little experience, and they are wondering how best could they communicate their science to policymakers. And then the other part of it, because it's still is how will scientists or engineering researchers that are interested in science policy but with no experience, how can they get started, getting those experience and training and exposure? Anybody can go with.
Well, I'm going to, of course, make sure that Liz has an opportunity to talk about all the incredible things that AGU provides in order for folks to get started here. I can't say enough good things about that. Another thing to be aware of is at your university or institution, there is probably a communications office, probably a government affairs office, and those are folks to also reach out and get to know so that you're coordinating with them. They can help you in producing a short brief about your science area or maybe the area that you're working on across a group of people. So be mindful of the resources you have at your own institution, and consider also finding a mentor there and finding out who has been taking advantage of opportunities to maybe go and talk to policymakers locally up to nationally. I really, again, want to emphasize there's policy is being made in a lot of different levels. And so I'd encourage people to make some of those direct people to people contacts. And that Liz, you should talk about many more resources.
Thank you so much, Viola. I appreciate it. And I appreciate Alan's plug earlier as well. Yeah, AGU is one scientific society that has a lot of resources and opportunities for folks who are interested in getting involved in science policy. Please do check ours out, even if you haven't become an AGU member yet. I think it's a great resource for anyone who is in this field, and there may be other societies as well that are of interest to you. So we have things like Alan mentioned, our congressional visits days, which is a great opportunity to meet your legislators for the first time with a lot of help and support. We'll set up meetings for folks, we'll give you talking points, we'll work with you on your messages and make sure that you feel ready when you go and have those conversations. And that first step to building a relationship with your policymakers is incredibly valuable. We also have things like an online learning course that we're launching later this year. If you want to get a LinkedIn certificate in science policy, you can watch that course. We have sessions at various AGU meetings. So if you're coming out to our annual meeting in San Francisco in December or any other AGU meeting or joint meetings that we do have sessions there. So please be sure to check out those science policy and communication sessions that we have. It's a great way to slip that into other academic work you're already doing. And then we have things like we sponsor a scientist every year to go to the AAAS case workshop, which is catalyzing advocacy in science and engineering. And that's basically a 2-day crash course in DC where you get to learn all about science policy. And then we have programs like Voices for Science or Local Science Partners, which if you want to spend a year doing a little bit of part-time work, being involved in science policy, that's a great way to build up an incredible skill set. But I'll drop a link in the chat so you can check out all of our programs and resources. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to chat more about that. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll just chime in really quickly to add that, when you're building some partnerships, possibly with policymakers, possibly with other people, it's really important to, one, be honest about whether you're looking for a particular ask, right? Do you have a particular course of action in mind, or are you looking to explore like how you're building a relationship together? Sometimes we hear this advice about really wanting to make partnerships that are not just transactional, that they are very generational, very I'm blanking on the word relational. There we go. And that's really important. And people can sense when you have something that you want to ask of them. And so personally, I think it's really helpful to be upfront about that and be honest about that. It's not a bad thing. When you ask people for help, they want to, and then they help you a little bit. They're primed to be able to help you more in the future. So you might not start with your big ask. You might start with your small ask and then work up to it. But if you don't put yourself out there, then they won't know that you're going to be a partner in the future as well. So that might be whether it's working with policymakers, it might be someone that you want to hire you as a postdoc. It could be, all sorts of different things. And again, similar sorts of approaches, depending what sort of connection you're trying to build.
Oh, thank you. I am sure that others, you're adding your question on the Q&A tab as well, because the question now is shifting towards funding, and someone is interested to know how can we strategically organize to sustain federal funding for basic science and research. And equally a closely related question is there other options to consider outside federal funding? Do you have experience with funding outside federal funding? Can you hear us?
I mean, I think it's important to think about what scale of funding you're looking at, and what you're trying to achieve. That might mean looking at foundations, that might be looking at private funders, that might be looking at other federal funders. One thing that I'll emphasize right now is I'm hearing from a lot of folks in the US cryosphere community, hey, there's not money for this, there's not money for that. And that's true. But I'm also hearing that there's a lot of money, for example, in snow science right now. There's parts of research budgets that are getting slashed, and there are other parts that aren't. And so by having kind of a broad view of what you're interested in working on, not that you're only going to follow the funding, but you can identify what current priorities are and be able to demonstrate alignment between your work and what funding interests there are right now. So maybe it's a particular topical area, maybe it's another approach. For example, there's a lot of federal money that's going towards AI research right now. What does that mean in your field? How are you partnering with people to use that in your research areas? It also might mean identifying international partners to work with, right? It's a lot easier to get a small piece of the pie for yourself and then find an international partner that might be able to do a larger chunk as well. Not always easy to build those partnerships, especially if everyone's looking for money all the time. But that also can be another approach.
Okay.
Um, I'll add just a little bit on this too. So the one thing to keep in mind, and that I think is just a good tool to get good at creating for yourself and usable in many different ways, is that one page summary of a project idea. That's something, if you're going to get funding from a federal agency, that's a thing that you're going to want to perhaps email to a program officer and say, hey, can we have a conversation? Here's the concept with some detail, with an understanding of, why and impact. But it's also the kind of thing that a program officer from a foundation is going to be interested in seeing. So I feel like pairing both that kind of, wider, how can my science evolve? How can it be interact with different spaces? But then once you see an opportunity space or you anticipate an opportunity space, taking time to really put that idea down into a short summary document that you can have conversation around. I think that's really important for that. When it comes to organizing to sustain federal funding, certainly join efforts by bigger groups that are creating sort of campaigns and action spaces. But remember too that just being a visible scientist in your community is really helpful for people understanding who scientists are, what they do, that they are trustworthy people. So that can just be about also having local talks and activities, writing letters to the editor, to local papers or magazines, commenting online, providing public comment in space. Simply being visible as a scientist doing good work is also helpful for people seeing the value of science in our society.
Thank you. Tony, I don't know what our time looks like, and if we're on track, I will invite Afzal and Katie that be monitoring the Q&A portal. If there is any question they would like to ask, I will hand it over to them right now.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Tony.
Oh, I was just gonna note that we are about at the top of the hour, so we do have the option. I know our breakout sessions are focused on sort of like smaller groups with each of our panelists if we wanted to bring remaining questions into that portion of the agenda, just so we do have time to get our 2 breakout rooms in.
Okay, that's interesting. Oh, maybe you should give us like some reminder on how the breakout rooms will work and get situated. The breakout room is a great opportunity to continue these conversations, and more so, it will not be recorded, so you will freeze, freestyle. So
Yeah.
I think everyone is back on the breakout sessions. May we use this opportunity to thank all the attendees and the panelists. I hope you had fruitful deliberation in the breakout sessions. The end of this webinar is our hope will mean the beginning of impactful engagement moving forward. So continue to connect, stay tuned. If you've stayed to this point, it only means you are a science policy enthusiast. The panelists are open and would like to continue to connect and discuss with you. Their contact information as displayed, and some will probably be on the chat as we close. We want to thank everyone who joined us and who worked tirelessly to bring this event to fruition. This is a collaborative partnership among many groups and organizations. And I want to thank the organizing team, some of whom are here, Tony, Abzal, Katie, Angela, Maggie, Neosha, for making this to happen. And we want to thank our partners, from our panelists to other group, IAPIC, PISECO, for the support they gave us in disseminating this program and the suggestions. Now that you are here, and now that you have participated, we look forward to continue to partner with you moving forward, engaging with you, connecting with you over LinkedIn, over platforms. And when we meet in person, maybe during AGU or any other conferences and events, feel free to remind us. We are happy that you attended, and we look forward to other opportunities. Continue to keep an eye out on USAPECS. We have other ideas and initiatives like this that we are working on bringing to our partners. Thank you very much for coming. We are happy you are here. Thank you.
Thank you all.